A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Freddy's home.
It's the movie franchise that skyrocketed Freddy Krueger into stardom and put him in the cultural zeitgeist. The series that cemented this burn-faced dream stalker among the slasher elites. Krueger starred in 9 films, including a remake and a versus movie. That doesn't even include his television series that ran for 2 seasons, his video games, novelizations, merchandising, and comics. Freddy was everywhere throughout the 80s and early 90s, even though a lot of his films had some major problems. It's no secret that fans of horror think that the sequels were inferior to the original, especially those later installments. So what makes a film in this series good? Is it the characters, the script, music, performances, budget, director, cinematography? Sure, all of these things can help elevate the film, and honestly, some of these factors play a huge role. But what's the main draw for these movies? What do people want to see? Do they want to see boring dialogue scenes? Teen drama? Nah, people come for the dreams, they come for the nightmares, they come to see what sick and twisted dream Krueger will create to torture his victims. The Nightmare on Elm Street series is known for its imagination and fast dreamscapes. Jason Voorhees stalks people in the boring old woods, and Michael Myers hunts down people in a small town neighborhood. Krueger, on the other hand, can take you to his boiler room, drive a bus, turn you into a comic book character, bring you to a car graveyard, make it snow in your room, fly on a broomstick, turn into a caterpillar, turn into a giant snake, turn into your hall monitor. He can meet you at the pool, manipulate and distort his own body, and can even haunt the dreams of your unborn baby while it's still in the womb. There's no telling what Freddy will do or will become. The only limitation of Krueger and his nightmares is the own limitation of the human mind. Forget about the story, forget about the characters, forget about the plot, but instead, let's take a look at the best nightmares in the Elm Street series. And what makes some nightmares better than others? A good nightmare is scary, dark, imaginative, fantastical, relatable, creative. It can be shocking, twisted, creepy, not overly long, but not overly short either. It can be unassuming at first, and then it can hit you with a misdirection. The best nightmares are more than just jump scares. They stay with you long after the movie finishes. So what's the best of the best? Which nightmare stands above them all? Well, there's only one way to find out. This is the top 10 nightmares in the Elm Street series. Number 10. At the bottom of our list, we have a dream from Freddy vs. Jason. Now, not every nightmare in the Elm Street series is a good one. In fact, many are pretty lame, especially in Freddy vs. Jason, the movie that brought us Pinball Jason and Caterpillar Freddy. Yikes. But the number 10 nightmare is the best and most horrific dream found in Freddy vs. Jason. While not the most traditional, it is the most emotionally significant dream we get in this one. Mark reminisces about his brother who died by the hands of Freddy. We get some decently atmospheric moments as Mark checks out a noise that he heard. Mark is the only one afraid of Freddy at this point in the movie, and that's an ingredient that goes underappreciated. When people are afraid of Freddy, it makes Freddy seem more intimidating, more absolute, like an impending doom. It's as if the person knows their deepest, darkest fears and knows that Freddy will use that against them. The characters seem more real, but also more vulnerable, which can make the audience uneasy. I also love the small little fake out here. When opening the bathroom door, the fog quickly fades and he finds nothing. I love the mind games that Freddy uses. Mark sees his deceased brother in the tub. The slit wrist and the Freddy voice make the scene impactful. The taunting is great, but why have CGI foot body horror? It's silly. Even the practical effect looks silly and flimsy. Mark's brother approaches, and I love that his skin boils. Freddy burns Mark and leaves a little note on the back of him. Is that Mark's back? No, it's Freddy's back. Number 9. Oh, the remake. What a divisive movie. While it does have some fans,
It's impossible.
people tend to mostly hate this movie. While I agree the movie is mostly crap, seriously, every nightmare just boils down to a cut-to-pieces manufactured jump scare, there are still some nice elements to it. Jackie Earle Haley did a fine job, and I like a lot of what he brought to the character. I think the direction, editing, and especially the script were terrible. Set design, though, was pretty great. I think the moldy wet classroom is fantastic, and I can totally see Freddy Krueger fitting into this rotting world. The best nightmare from this one is the bathtub dream. Yes, maybe I like it because it's basically a shot-for-shot remake of the original bathtub scene. Like, how can you go wrong? It's still scary all these years later. You're so vulnerable in the bath, and even though we've seen it before, I like the twist it takes. Nancy gets dressed after her bath and she walks into her room, which has snow falling from the ceiling. This is one of my favorite moments. Snowing inside is such a cool idea and it really makes it feel like a dream. And with the snow, we transition to Nancy at her old daycare. Freddy talks to her all sweet like, "Don't worry though, Nancy set an alarm so she'll wake up any moment."
I set an alarm.
Yes, you did. In your dream.
I love the idea of Nancy only setting an alarm in her dreams. Now, I've had dreams like that where I know I need to get up, so I dream that I start getting ready just to notice that I never left my bed. It's a nice touch and it makes you second guess everything. It's something that the series never really touched until now. Number 8. Wes Craven's New Nightmare is one of the best films in the series. It's serious in tone, darker, and the meta aspect was refreshing for 1994 and probably a little too ahead of its time. Remember, this was still 2 years before Scream, and it's arguably even more meta and self-aware than any Scream film. And while everything about this movie is tight and well polished, unfortunately the dream sequences leave much to be desired. These dreams are some of the weakest in the whole franchise. An ancient cathedral with red and green pillars just doesn't do it for me. It lacks the grit and grime that I associate with Krueger. I understand that it's a different form of Krueger, and while I love the look and I appreciate the darker approach, he's not very scary here outside of maybe a moment or two. I like a lot of the different elements from all of the nightmares in this film, but the best nightmare from top to bottom is when Heather is sleeping in her bed and Freddy's blades pop up through the mattress, ripping the sheets. I honestly love this, and it terrifies me. Something under the bed hurting you while you're sleeping from a surface you think is safe. Spooky. When she wakes up, the glove isn't there, but the sheets are ripped. She hears her son Dylan downstairs, and Dylan is creepily singing the Elm Street song with knives taped to his fingers. Totally normal. It's a great dream within a dream sequence, and it ends with an earthquake waking Heather up. While it's all amazingly done, there's just not enough in this one to put it any higher on the list. Number 7. Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. What a joke of a movie. This was during Freddy's stand-up days, and let's just say, as hard as he tries, he's no Bugs Bunny. With failed attempts at humor galore, is there really anything noteworthy in this one? Actually, there is one dream worth talking about. Tracy's dream is one of the best and darkest in the series, and honestly is way too good for this movie. She starts in the bathroom and it cuts to her old house. I love when they do this kind of melding of worlds. Tracy didn't have a great childhood, and her dad was abusive both physically and mentally. It's heavily implied that her father used to force himself onto her. It's so messed up, it's dark, and you can see Tracy hurting in a really great character moment. It's a wonderful performance that really makes you feel for her. I formed an emotional connection to a character in Freddy's Dead? Weird. Her dad becomes Freddy and they duke it out, which does lessen the scene, and possibly for the better. Like I said before, it's heavy stuff, and a little kung fu makes it a lighter subject for all those teens that snuck into this one.
This, bitch!
Tracy wakes herself up by burning herself, which is a nice nod to the original, and it's used well here. It's by far the best dream in the film. It's artistic, dark, and true nightmare fuel. It almost went full on dark, and it's sort of a shame that we didn't get a seriously dark finale to Krueger in the original timeline.
Kids.
Number 6. Originally disliked by fans, A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 has gained in popularity over the last couple years, with it finally coming out as a gay film, something I was completely oblivious to as a kid. People started appreciating it for what it was. It was different than the first film, and it stands out when viewed next to the rest of the series. But that's what I like about it. It still has a lot of that grit and dirtiness that the first one had, just with slightly different rules. There are lots of good little nightmares found in part 2, and some of my favorite imagery in the whole series is found within this one. But the best overall dream is probably the first one. As always, we unknowingly started a nightmare. What seems like a normal school bus ride quickly turns awry. Geek antisocial nerd Jesse sits in the back seat, which is actually the best seat when the bus hits a bump, and the ride sure does get bumpy as it goes off-road into the desert. Who the heck could be driving that bus? The bus eventually stops and the ground opens up, revealing a fantastic miniature set. I love the imagination. The dream world literally warping around Jesse as Freddy takes over the nightmare. Freddy turns out to be the driver. Who would have thought? And this is the scariest Krueger has ever been after the original film. It's the classic cat and mouse game with no way out. Krueger did this a lot in the first movie, so it's great to see it return here. This is when Freddy is at his best. Slow, methodical, and playful, building the fear in his victims. It's beautiful. Number 5. A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 The Dream Warriors is largely responsible for Krueger jumping into the popular zeitgeist. This made him a star and people began to fall in love with this hunky dream man. Fans tend to love this one as well. There's a lot of really great nightmares here. At number 5 though is our opening nightmare. Well, actually, for the first time in the series, we don't open on a dream, which is a nice change of pace. Kristen is making a model of the Elm Street house. Her mother comes home from a date and ushers Kirsten into bed. As she begins to sleep, we dive into the nightmare. Kristen dreams of the Elm Street model house, which is now old and decrepit. As Kristen dreams, wind and leaves fall onto her bed, and it's revealed that she's sleeping next to the house, which is a really cool reveal. The kids sing their spooky jump rope song and Kristen meets a little girl who leads her inside. As they hear Freddy walking down the staircase, the little girl says,
"Freddy's home."
Kristen picks up the little girl and they run away. She runs through mud and into a big room full of hanging bodies. Kristen wakes up and then she walks into the bathroom, and we soon realize that this is a dream within a dream. The faucet handles turn into Freddy's hands and he appears in the mirror to cut Kristen. This is great as when Kristen eventually wakes up, she has harmed herself with a razor. This establishes that all Krueger murders look like suicide from an outside perspective. It's a chilling opening sequence, and the dream within a dream is a wonderful twist. The ideas and execution are brilliant, except that it annoys me that the little girl quickly becomes a doll, and it's very noticeable. It takes me right out of the experience and the reason that this nightmare isn't higher.
I gotta go now.
Number 4. Why do people hate on part 5, The Dream Child, so much? I get that it's a wacky idea, but what can you really do in a part 5 when you try to stick to continuity? While the script is pretty bad, the characters are actually well developed, and some of the concepts are brilliant. Direction and cinematography here are top notch. I like the darker approach to this one, and there is a stark contrast between this and part 4. Like, check out some of these shots. It's kind of a pretty movie. It does have its blunders though.
It's Super Freddy!
Which dream deserves the number 4 spot? While Alice is on her way to work, she runs across some kids in the park jumping rope, and suddenly it's nighttime. Did she fall asleep while walking? Or is this some sort of BS? Well, it's kind of BS. In part 4, Alice could pull people into her dreams, even if said person wasn't sleeping. Well, the same thing is happening here. Spoiler, Alice is pregnant and her unborn baby has her powers and is dreaming. The unborn baby boy brings people into his dreams, hence why Alice is in a nightmare in this scene, even though she was just awake. You'll also notice that this movie is a lot more gothic in tone. Does it fit with the rest of the series? No, but it does stand out as a stylish choice, and I kind of love it. Alice watches as Mary Helena, aka Amanda Krueger, gives birth to Freddy, and the baby is a burnt mess already? Wait, wasn't Freddy burned alive later in life? Why would the baby version of him be burned? I don't know. It doesn't make much sense, but baby Freddy is kind of cute. Baby Krueger runs around until he makes his way to his iconic clothes. And I love this sequence. I love how wild it is. As Freddy grows, the areas around him in the church bend and crack. The altar rises up, possibly giving some sort of symbolism. And Freddy looks fantastic. I love the one long arm. It's very asymmetrical and it fits this vibe. He's in the shadow, sneaky, spooky, and him walking into the fog. Oh my god, chef's kiss. And just like that, Alice walks into work, awake.
I thought you were dead. You're 4 hours late.
Number 3. You knew the original Nightmare on Elm Street would make this list eventually. This is the film that inspired it all. It's objectively the best and most frightening in the series. Krueger and Robert Englund's portrayal are very different in this one. Freddy is usually known as a wisecracking mastermind, using someone's biggest fear or their biggest passion against them. In the first one, though, he's a madman, clinically insane, unhinged, gross, and perverted. He's a bitter force, an awful force, twisted and sick. I adore Krueger in this one and appreciate all the nightmares that he's given me over the years. But what takes our number 3 spot? Well, it's when Nancy's in school. She dreams of her best friend Tina in a body bag, and that is some messed up stuff. In most slashers, the final girl has to witness the bodies of her friends in the final act. These are usually jump scares and has the final girl running from the corpses of her loved ones. Nancy instead tries to follow Tina, tries to help her. This makes Nancy one of the best final girls. She's terrified, but yet is resilient enough to push through for her friends. That friendship isn't lost on death either, and she faces her grief unlike other final girls who run from it. If you've ever had a dream about a loved one who died, you wouldn't be running from them in fear, but instead, you too would act as Nancy does. It's a detail that makes me love this movie. Nancy eventually follows Tina's trail to the basement. This trip is perfection as there are random leaves in the halls and seemingly normal moments like running into a hall monitor that turned dark and twisted in a way that could only happen in dreams. Once in the basement, Freddy appears. He cuts himself and he giggles at Nancy's disgust and fear. Nancy's exit disappears and she runs throughout the boiler room, winding up at a dead end. She has to burn herself on a hot pipe to wake herself up. It's a beautifully detailed sequence that has everything you want in a good nightmare.
Come to Freddy.
Number 2. Welcome back to Dream Warriors. After Kristen is taken to the mental ward where she meets the other surviving kids of Elm Street, she has another dream. It starts off rather creepily with a tricycle rolling into a room with bloody tracks. As Kristen slowly exits the room, the door closes and she's transported to the Elm Street house. As she explores the house, we get one of my favorite Freddy moments. The room breaks apart and a giant Freddy snake picks Kristen up and begins to eat her. I love the idea that Freddy can take on any form. It's a dream after all, and this is the first time that we really get another worldly kind of figure. Kristen calls Nancy into her dream through her dream power, and Nancy saves the day, but not before Freddy recognizes her.
Oh my god.
Body horror Freddy is one of my favorites, and this sequence pulls off the imagination and limitlessness that only a dream can have. It's an oh shit type of moment.
Oh shit!
Honorable mentions. Greta's death in Dream Child is great, especially when you watch the uncensored version. Freddy literally force feeds a fasting model her own bloated stomach in front of rich fashion agencies. It's so messed up, but I love it. Debbie's death in part 4 almost made the list. I love that Freddy turns her into a cockroach, and the effects by Screaming Mad George are phenomenal. I just hate the loop dream that Alice and Dan share. I don't understand who was sleeping or when they went to sleep. Ugh.
You know, I get the weirdest feeling we've done this before.
Philip's death in part 3 is pure nightmare fuel and arguably the best kill in the series, but we never really see Philip run into Freddy. Feels like a cheap shot. Freddy just sort of paralyzes him and then cuts him up. Yeah, Philip is awake while Freddy puppets him, but unfortunately there's no lead up to it. There's no cat and mouse moment.
Have a nice stroll, asshole.
I like Jesse standing over his sister's bed with Freddy's glove on in part 2. The movie needed more of this, the idea that Jesse was honestly a danger to others. It's too brief to count.
It's late. Go back to sleep.
In New Nightmare, when Nancy falls asleep watching the TV and she checks her closet to find Freddy. It's tense, but only lasts for a moment as an earthquake wakes her up. The earthquakes were the real heroes in that film.
It was the earthquake.
Number 1. The best nightmare in the Elm Street franchise has to go to Tina's death. It has everything. Tina wakes up thinking someone is playing a trick on her by throwing pebbles at her window. Well, those pebbles are actually teeth. During this dream, we get the famous ceiling shot with Nancy sleeping. It's a thing of beauty, and even though it's just spandex and clever edits, the effect is extremely believable. So much better than the CGI crap in the remake. Who thought this was a good idea? Tina goes downstairs and outside to see who's messing with her. She hears someone whispering her name and continues to follow it to the alley. Freddy appears and stretches his arms long, creating images that can only be found in nightmares. And we have one of the best moments in horror movie history. Krueger showing his face in all its disgusting glory with the perfect line.
This is God.
And a god he would soon become. Tina runs from Freddy, and there's something about Krueger's run that is awesome. I love how deranged it is. He's playing with Tina, and that's frightening. He scares her to her front entrance, cuts off his fingers, and then attacks her before she can even enter the house. There's something terrifying about Tina getting murdered on her front porch. So close to safety, it's very Last House on the Left of Craven. During the nightmare, we cut back to Rod, who only watches helplessly. Now, I'm not sure if I should add this next segment as it's from Rod's point of view, and he's completely awake, but because we're still dealing with Tina's nightmare, I'm gonna include it. Tina is dragged around the walls and ceiling of her room, being brutally cut into. For a first-time viewer, Tina is portrayed as the main character, so this moment is a true Psycho moment, and possibly even better than Wes Craven's Psycho moment in Scream. This dream is truly the quintessential nightmare on Elm Street.
She dreamed this was gonna happen.
Let me know your favorite nightmares in the Elm Street series in the comments below, and thank you all so much for watching. And whatever you do, don't fall asleep. Stay spooky, everyone.